Let's talk about fear. Actually, literally. On the Real Estate Pessimist podcast, our next episode is going to be about fear and the difference between fear and prudence. We often get these things mixed up. We think they're the same thing, but they are not. One will move you forward and one can kill you. And it's probably not the one you think. Please join us on the Real Estate Pessimist podcast, where Kristi Candle, me, Erik Stenbakken, unpack fear, how to overcome it, move forward, and not die in the process.
This is the Real Estate Pessimist, but don't let the name fool you. We're not here to be negative. We're here to be real, to pull back the curtain and show you what's behind the highlight reels. I'm Kristi Candle, a developer, investor, and someone who's made a career out of turning hard lessons into practical tools for helping others become developers in their own communities. Along with my co-host, Erik Stenbakken, we're bringing you the unfiltered stories behind the deals, the ones you don't see on social media, the blown budgets, the nightmare tenants, the surprise wins, and the wisdom that comes from actually living it. Because real estate isn't all about private jets and passive income. Sometimes it's evictions and 3 a.m. plumbing disasters, and we're here for all of it.
Hey, awesome. Thank you, Kristi. Yeah, we are here for the real deal on the Real Estate Pessimist podcast. And today's topic is fear. We are going to talk about fears, not the stuff that hides under your bed at night. You know, a nightlight solves that. Wouldn't that be awesome, right? The real estate equivalent of a nightlight. Just put it on and we're all good. But there was a point where Kristi and I talked about this, like, hey, what was a moment when I was really scared about something and did it, right? So there's one that I talked about early in the podcast about an Australian beach. Maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe we won't. But one of the scariest things I did was quit my full-time job. I was not offered any assurance that it was going to be successful. Yeah, I was going to quit and become a freelance photographer. You just type that into anything. What are your odds of success as a freelance photographer? This is in the 90s.
But you had a list of like 100 people who were going to hire you and you knew you'd make X amount of dollars, right?
I did not. That's what makes it scary. There's a saying that bravery is knowing that it will hurt and doing it anyways. Stupidity is the same. And that's why life is hard, right? And so we want to break down today what motivates fears, how that can stop you from being successful as a real estate investor or just as a person. Now, the short story is I did quit my job. I tried it once and I failed. True story. I turned in my resignation to the president. I worked at a university and I said, here's my letter of resignation. And he stormed down and he's like, how, you can't do this. This is like, you should just stay here and stick it out and blah, blah, blah. And I was so like taken aback. Okay. And I did. I worked there for another couple, weeks, maybe a couple months. And I just thought, oh man, he just pushed back so hard. I didn't have very good boundaries. And then I thought, no, really, I really need to do this because I knew if I don't take this next step, then I won't take the step after that or the step after that. I'll stay right here, maybe forever. And you've seen people like this at work. They're just phoning it in, or they're dissociated from the whole thing, or they're bitter. They're active. They show up to work, but they're just bitter. And you're like, man, you should have left about a decade ago. And I realized if I don't take a move, I'll be one of those people, either crazy or indifferent or bitter or whatever. It's like, I can't be that person. And so what I did the next time is I wrote my resignation letter, a polite one. I wasn't burning bridges, but I waited till after work and I slipped them under the door of 3 people, the president and 2 vice presidents that I work for. And I can't get them back. They are literally under their door and I can't turn back. And now all 3 of them have it. And there you go. And this time it stuck. People said, hey, good for you. In fact, my boss came to me and said, if I was a little more brave, I would quit too. Wow. I was surprised. Like, this is a difficult thing for a lot of people.
I have a similar story when I started my company in 2014. I really knew that I needed to start my company. I thought, okay, what could this look like? I had been working for developers, and maybe while doing my own development projects and having that, 2-year lead time to make money, I could do consulting. Or maybe my current company would be willing to hire me, but I knew I needed to let go of these golden handcuffs and go out all in on myself. So what I did was I got it all teed up. I had enough savings that I'm like, hey, if I can even get 6 months to 12 months and get this sabbatical, I can say I gave it a shot. I can always go back and work for someone else. And then I backfilled my position with my mentor. And I had her teed up ready to say, yeah, if they want to hire me to take over your position, I'm open to this. And since we were technically looking for another development project manager at the time, I had already introduced them. So then I took the owner of my company, I said, hey, can we grab lunch? And we went out and we talked. And I just told him, I said, I am very impressed by what he had done and what he had grown. And I said, I would be so filled with regret if I didn't give myself a shot like you gave yourself a shot. And I said, and don't worry, like Vasanthi is here. She's going to make sure we'll have a clean transition. You will be just fine, but I have to take this shot on myself. And then when you basically backfill your position, you've got nowhere else to go except give it a shot. Thankfully, it did work out, and there's plenty of ups and downs along the way. But I'll tell you, I was full of fear and unknowns, and who knows what would happen.
Right. And so as we look at this, fear, if it's not part of your real estate vocabulary, or at least you don't feel some unease about things, you are either psychotic or you're going to go broke, right? It's just because you need a healthy dose of this. Now, this morning, I got curious about this, thinking about fear. Why is fear sometimes good and why is it sometimes bad? And I think actually most of the time, fear is not a good thing. It's a sign. It's a sign that we should pay attention to. But here's the difference. I plugged in and looked at the difference between fear and prudence. And this is really important in this podcast as we unpack this. And I'm going to read you some definitions here. If let's suppose we're faced with a decision or a challenge, we think, and we feel something in us and we think, wow, what is that? Now, this is what fear is. Fear is motivated by anxiety, worry, or an emotional reaction to potential harm or negative consequences. It's emotions. It's often irrational or exaggerated perception of risk. And the effect is it can lead to avoidance behavior that limits growth, opportunity, or experience. Now, prudence, on the other hand, sounds like the name from an 1800s novel heroine, right? But prudence is a real word. And this is what, if we don't do something out of prudence, the motivation is based on careful judgment, wisdom, thoughtful consideration of risks and benefits. The nature is rational and measured decision-making aimed at protecting well-being or achieving long-term goals. So it can be either protective or it can be forward-looking and say, I'm going to do this because it will get me somewhere. And the effect leads to cautious but strategic choices that minimize unnecessary risks. Now, there's a lot of things in those definitions, but if you're watching the video, by the way, we're on YouTube as well as all the podcast platforms and Instagram. And if you're on Instagram, we're on all the others. So fear happens back here in your brain, your amygdala. It's the emotional, like, fight or flight kind of a thing, right? Gets your adrenaline going. And prudence is using the frontal lobe of your brain. It's your rational decision-making. And that makes all the difference. You can still feel uncomfortable about something, right? Just be clear about that. But prudence takes a measured approach to what you're dealing with and says, hey, now what's really going on? So let's unpack some of the types of things that we might be facing if we're having that discomfort, because this is really important. You have to name it. If you just leave it as this unknown fear of the dark, the boogeyman kind of a thing, right? I had a conversation with somebody and they said, the people are saying awful things about me. Like, well, who are they saying it to? Yeah, I know, people. Well, what are they saying? Things, right? But this is what we do. It's unnamed. It's amorphous. It's the boogeyman, right? But naming it turns the lights on, which dissipates the fear. So
it's amazing how well naming something truly does free you and allow you to let it go and move forward.
That's it. So in our outline here, we've named a few things to ask yourself. Am I having this feeling? Is it financial? Let's call it fear. Is it financial fear? Is it fear of damaged ego? Is it relational fear? Like, if I do that, they might not like me anymore. And Kristi and I were talking before we rolled here. Well, let's just stop right now. What is one of those fears relationally if we don't move forward? Like, man, well, if I do move forward, the fear is that Like we,
A lot of times we'll have our friends and other people who will tell us not to do something and not to move forward, and it's not because it's a bad decision. In fact, I was just chatting with another friend this morning, and he realized and had the epiphany that I think the reason people were poo-pooing my progress and my idea for how to move forward was because it would have made them feel bad and go, wait, I need to take action now too.
right. And this is why having your posse around you that is willing to take calculated risks for growth is so important. Because if you're surrounding yourself with people who will not move, who will not take steps forward, who stay with the status quo, that normalizes it. And then you're the outlier. If you step out, then in a way, you're kind of calling everybody else out, right? Because if you're immortal and you put your pants on one leg at a time and you can do this, then when they look at you doing that, either they have to face the reality that, well, they probably could too, but they're not. And then that damages their ego. And so it's like, well, you're the crazy one then, because that's way easier to label that other person. And so that is a very real fear keeping some people back. And until
Shoot, I
you
was
name it,
just and with the naming, and I was just we had everyone over for a pool party barbecue this weekend, and we were talking about the fact that we're like, wait, our friend circles are decreasing, and in a good way, because we no longer have 20 or 30 friends around to do everything with, because that isn't the type of person that we are anymore. Now I've got some friends who are buying businesses and some friends who are getting into development. And we even said during our conversation, we're like, hey, let's be our accountability partners. Are you an aspiring real estate developer who wants to get in the game but feels overwhelmed by where to start? What if I personally mentored you, giving you the exact guidance and strategies to complete your first development project without making costly mistakes or needing millions in the bank? Would you take me up on that offer? I'm Kristi Candle, and I've developed over 450 million in projects across the country. After nearly 20 years in development, I created this mentorship to give you the exact guidance and support I wish I had when I started. Are you next? I mean, we've all talked about community, which is why we started to host these monthly barbecues. And at the same time, let's take this further. Let's go a little deeper and let's be accountability partners. You say you want to buy this business in Q3. Great. What are the steps you're going to take monthly and weekly? And let's hold each other accountable and have deeper, more meaningful relationships as well, knowing that that's going to leave some old friends behind and that we're choosing to move on without them.
and this is really important. And I don't want anybody that's listening to hear this. If you are feeling like your friends are leaving you, or that you're leaving your friends, it isn't so much ditching your friends, your friend group, or people ditching you. It's like they're moving, right? If they're moving and you're not, that's not at you, right? It just so happens that they're moving on. And if you have decided to stay put, hey, maybe that's okay. That's your decision. But as you move and as you take more risks, I encourage calculated risks. But as you do that, you build risk tolerance and you're able to take more risks and you're able to do more things. And the number of people who are willing to do those things with you, it just decreases. This is just a natural thing.
Another one that we have on here where we talk about the fear of failure.
Right. Talk
But
about that all the time.
literally this weekend, I asked someone, I said, actually, are you potentially afraid of the success that's going to come when you finally let this go and you finally step into your full self? Are you potentially afraid of what's on that other side? And he had an epiphany the week prior, and he's like, yeah, because now I'm going to be completely out in the open and stepping into what I am supposed to be. And it is scary, and your ego gets in the way because it goes, wait, I'm controlling the situation. This is what we do. This is how we respond. And now you're completely going in a different direction and coming into yourself. Yeah, the fear of success is a real thing, and we will self-sabotage. And until you become more awake and alert to how you do it and how you self-sabotage, your ego will play a big role, and you'll just always wonder why you're held back. But that's been a key in my process as well.
And there are entire books about this. And if that's you, if you're feeling like, well, I could go ahead and I probably would succeed, and then you find yourself doing things that undermine that progress, that's the thing you should really look at. Name it and look at it. Sometimes there's a fear of not having the right skills. Like, oh, I can't do that because I don't know how. But friends, let me tell you, you could probably build your own nuclear powered submarine by content you find between Reddit and YouTube. You could do just about anything. So the idea that there's a lack of skill that you don't know, you know what? In 1900, yeah, unless there was someone in your town who did that thing that you could apprentice with, it's a real thing. You could say, I don't know how to do, fill in the blank. But today, sorry, that's really not an excuse. If you've got an internet connection, you can figure it out because somebody has posted about it. So knowing calling these fears out is a good start, but just seeing it and saying, well, my fear actually is ego, or my fear is success. It's a fear of success, or it's a fear of, whatever it is. What do we do? Kristi, what are some of your tools that you use to take apart what is fear and move ahead with prudence?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one is becoming aware and seeing what it is and labeling it. So we've talked about that, but at the same time, a way to be prudent is getting out of your emotional part of your brain and getting to the rational and going, what is the worst that can happen? So a lot of times I like to go, am I going to die or be seriously injured as a result of this? Okay, no. Am I going to completely blow up my portfolio and it'll all be gone and I'll be homeless on the street? No. Okay. So what literally is the worst that'll happen? And most of the time, it honestly comes down to your ego and going, I'm going to fail. And everyone's going to witness that failure and they're going to say, that's it. Her magic touch is gone. She's lost it all. Nothing will ever work again. And the reality of that is actually the opposite. People remember our wins and successes way more than the 20 or 30 or 40 failures that we had to get to that one win. So a key is, what is the worst that will happen? And then just understanding that our ego is going to try and play all sorts of tricks on us. And that if we truly want to step into our own and live to our fullest self and our fullest potential, that we have to recognize that, name it, and take the steps forward anyway. What about you? What types of tricks do you use?
Yeah, I think the key here for me is to evaluate and mitigate. Okay, let's just talk about a single family home purchase and some of the fears that we might have. Let's suppose it's 25 years old. Well, can you name right now? I know you can. So why don't you throw a couple at me? Throw 3 things that could go wrong with a single family home the home's 25 years old. Common
Roof,
things.
HVAC, any part of the plumbing or the water lines going bad.
Okay, so we'll just take a couple of those. Now, the roof. How could I possibly know if there's a problem with the roof? See, evaluate and mitigate. I can say, oh, I'm afraid there's a bad roof. Well, it's not my roof yet, right? I'm buying this thing. So, and I've done this. We didn't even plan this, but we were buying a house. It was a single family home. And so we went up and had an amazing real estate agent, and he actually opened up the attic crawl space and we went into it, or he did. I wasn't very aggressive at that point. Now I would. And we later had an inspection. He said, something's funny about this up here. So we had an inspection and someone had a marijuana farm in the attic. So they had a whole watering system and they had lighting up there. But what they didn't have was very good ventilation. And so it rotted the decking. So I was faced with a bad roof. But remember, it's not my roof yet. And so we went to the sellers and said, we're going to need a new roof, including new decking. And we want you to take I think it was $20,000 off the price. They said, oh, we're not doing that. That's too much. I said, well, okay, good luck, because now this is a disclosable, known defect in the house. So you have to put that in your disclosures, and every other buyer that's coming forward is going to look at that. And so you got 2 choices. One, you can wait for somebody else to not care about that, or you can sell it to us right now for $20,000 less, because I am willing to deal with that. Because I'd had somebody come out and take a look at the roof and say, I'll replace the whole thing, including the decking removal, for, I don't know, maybe $17,000. I said, okay, awesome. We got a little bit of margins, which, by the way, you will always use. So there you go. It's evaluate and mitigate. Now, at first they said no, and then they thought about it for a few days, and they came back and said, actually, now that we've thought about it, yes, you still want to buy it.
Because now they've thought about the ramifications of all of this and they're like, wait, you saw it. You weren't scared away. Other people will be scared away from that. They don't want any projects. So they were able to come back to the table. You mitigated the risk. So now you go, the roof is bad. Great. I know I'm going to replace it.
And this is the process you go through. If it's a bad water heater, well, guess what? They sell those. There are people that install those. And so we look at this and say, okay, how can I evaluate the real risk instead of keeping it fuzzy and nebulous, like, things could go wrong. Well, things is the equivalent of the boogeyman, right? What things? Right? If you live in an area with expansive soils, could be a foundation issue. Fine, hire an engineer. The place where I'm sitting right now, we hired an engineer to take a look at the foundation before we bought it. And turned out it was okay, right? So evaluate and mitigate. Now, one of the tools that I use personally is a fear assessment worksheet. And if you're listening, you can't see that I'm holding up an actual sheet of paper here. And Kristi's nodding. It says fear assessment worksheet because I have to name it. It starts at the top with my desire. What do I actually want? Because sometimes we don't name it. We don't just call out and say, this is what I want on the other side of this. I just want to move forward. Well, what's forward? What does winning look like? All right. So name where you want to go, because until you get your destination named clearly, you're not going to have the motivation to get through trouble. It's like, oh, here's trouble. It's like, why would I go through that? If you don't have a reason on the other side of trouble, you won't do the work. So it starts with a desire. What do I want? Then I define what the problem is. And then I define the mitigation. What could I do to prevent this? And then the third column is repair. Well, let's suppose the mitigation thing kind of works, but not really. And now I've got a problem. And I think, wow, what could I possibly do to fix this? Has anyone in the history of the world solved this problem? Right? Mitigation didn't work. The problem actually happened. And I'll tell you how I used this once. I've got a van. I bought a new cargo van several years ago, and I am in the process of converting that to a camper van. I had a camper van for over 2 decades, drove it many, many thousands of miles, camped in it many, many nights. So I'm doing a new one. Well, here's the funny thing about a new van. They're expensive. And I'm looking to put windows in the side of this. Well, when you want to put a window in, but there's no window, you have to cut a hole in the side of a van. So I'm looking at the blank side of a van with no windows thinking, am I going to really take this drill and this jigsaw and cut a hole in the side of the metal? Right? Because at that point, you can't take it back to the dealer and say, actually, I changed my mind. They're like, so we noticed you can't do
Rather
that.
large hole here. No.
Right. So I was terrified. I had not the replacement window, but I had the camper window to put in there. It was an awesome window. It's a dual pane window. It opens out for fresh air. If you pull on the top part on the inside and you slide down, it's a bug screen. If you lift from the bottom, it's a blackout screen. Super cool window. And I wanted it in the van. So I wrote down my desire. I wrote down the definition of my fear. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to screw this up so bad that it'll just like, I don't know, I'll ruin the van and it'll be worth nothing. So as part of the process here, I have to actually name it. What are the chances are that my van will be worth nothing if I mess it up? Okay, that's not true. Well, okay, so prevention. What could I do to prevent doing this wrong? Well, I could watch YouTube videos. I could read the instructions. I know, crazy concept. I could read the instructions. I could use a template. I could measure 3 times. I could measure 4 times. I could ask somebody else to come and help me and double check my measurements. All these things are things that you can do in investing in your life, right? You can ask for outside perspectives. You can get a professional. You can hire a coach. You can get a consultant. All of these things you can do to help mitigate your fear of moving. Oh, I've never bought multifamily. I can't do that. Well, wait a minute. Has anyone ever done this before in the history of real estate? Actually, yes. Are there books I could read? Also, yes. Well, are there insurance agents? Are there inspectors? Are they? Yes, 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 yes to all of those things. All right, so stack the deck in your favor. So on this van situation, I did. I used a template. I measured 3 times. I watched videos. I bought new blades for my saw. I took my time. Now, before I was willing to cut, though, I thought, repair. What happens if I screw this up? Well, if you cut a hole too small, the solution is you just cut it a little bigger. Okay, I could solve that. And then I thought, well, what if I really screw it up and the saw gets away from me and I cut it an inch too big and now I can't put it in my window? What could possibly happen here? And I thought, well, I could always take this to a van upfitter and they put in a bigger window. I'm like, that's it. Like, that's my worst case scenario. If after all the analysis and mitigation and steps, my worst case scenario is I go and pay a little bit more and somebody puts something in really cool, I'm like, oh, So I got out my saw and cut the holes.
I'm still stuck on the fact that you said, if my saw goes crazy and I'm an inch off, dang. All right, mister.
Yeah, right. But because fears do that to us, right? Fears get wild and irrational. And they're like, well, what if I you know what? Here's the sad thing is that the things that are going to get you are the things that you're not even worried about, right? Those things are going to come out of the blue and you're going to have to deal with those. So really, when you have opportunity to move forward with prudence and you don't do it, that is fear stopping you. I am co-host of this podcast because education is my calling. That's also why I developed a course on short-term rentals. It's called STR in an Hour, and it's perfect for busy professionals. It's a lot of content packed into 1 hour. No fluff, no upsell. It's an overview of STRs from A to Z. Everything from how to choose a property to how to estimate income and expenses. It's literally the best and most content I could pack into 59 minutes. With over 4,000 nightly stays in my own STRs, I've learned important lessons, and I want to share them with you. Link with more information in the show notes.
If you were to just go back and look at the prior months and years of your life and think about the things that you have achieved and accomplished so far, you are going to be so impressed by how resilient, how strong, the challenges you've overcome, the relationships you've worked through, the health scares that have happened. You're going to realize, wow, like I actually do have everything I need right here. And I can step out of fear and into situations with prudence to then go forward and take some action. And we're not saying jump off the cliff. We're just saying, I don't know, take the first couple steps on the hike and see if you like it.
That's right. And that's so important, is that we'll look at the destination, we'll look at somebody else and we'll say, oh, they jumped off the cliff. They must be so brave. Well, guess what? They probably started by jumping off the curb. And then they just started jumping off the edge of the pool, do the 4-inch differential there, right? And then they probably started jumping off the edge of the pool and getting a little bit more height. And then they started on the low dive. You see what I'm saying? Is that when you give yourself opportunity to prove to yourself that you can do it, then you can take the next step. And that's really, really important here, is that you're not conjuring up this bravery from nothing. You're building it, right? Now, on this fear worksheet, I got a couple of the things that I do that really help me. I call out, what are the actual odds of my fear happening, right? So what are the actual odds of me buying a house that I have looked at, and now I am the agent, so I'm looking at them myself, that we hire an inspector to look at, and that somebody else looks at? What are the odds that we're going to miss everything? Actually, it's like 0 point something something. Now, the possibility that we miss something, okay, but what's the realistic likelihood that we're going to miss the big ticket items, like the foundation's crumbling and we didn't notice? Okay, if we're looking at it on purpose, slim. The roof. What can you do to find out what the condition of a roof is? Well, guess what? You can look at the bottom side of a roof in the attic. You can look at the top by actually walking it or flying a drone up there or whatever. There are so many ways you can actually evaluate the odds and name it. Because if you're afraid, you're like, oh, I'm afraid to move forward on this because I think it's going to be a disaster. Then you call it and you say, well, actually the odds are probably single digits.
And even if you're someone who goes, hey, if I looked at the underside of the roof, I'd be clueless. I wouldn't have any idea. Or if I walked on top, guess what? Contractors will actually come help you. You might pay them $200, $300 to come out and spend their time to check your foundation, to check your roof. But now you have a licensed contractor who specializes in that. So could they still miss something? Sure. But you have now mitigated your risk so much by getting someone out there and spending a few $100s on something you don't own yet. So that way you can, if you need to get out, if you need to walk from the deal, you can before getting fully pregnant and owning it and then going, oh my gosh, now I have a $20,000 hit I didn't know ahead of time. I would much rather spend that couple hundred up front of that hard-earned money than be stuck with something on the back end.
Yeah. And I've walked away from deals before. We've had an inspection done on a place. We made an offer, had an inspection. They come back and they said, hey, the roof is going to be $15,000 to fix this. So we go back to the seller and ask, and they're like, nope, we're not changing prices. Guess what? I walked. I don't have to buy that. I've done that multiple times. And people say, oh, you lost $300, $400 on an inspection. You could look at it that way, or you could look at it that I saved I lost $300, but I dodged a $15,000 ticket that I would have had. So there are people who can help you. So calling it, looking at the odds. I think it's important to look at the benefits of an attempt. Like what's possible? What would you learn if you actually assess things? I mean, low risk. What if you just looked at things on Zillow? And then you said, well, if at a purchase price of this, and then you looked on other places to see what's rent going out, and you looked at a mortgage calculator. Well, what's the mortgage? What would that look like? Well, how much could I cash flow? How much could I budget? You know how much that costs you? It's nothing. It's your internet bill for the month and a keyboard. You can do all of that stuff for free. But that gives you a little more bravery. And you're like, okay, now I'll talk to a real estate agent and maybe we'll go look at some places. Okay, so maybe now I'll make an offer on the deals that make all of these things build your confidence as you move forward. Even if it's not a successful outcome and you didn't buy the property, you still learn something. And that's part of my fear worksheet to say, well, if I tried it and it didn't work, what are the benefits of that anyways? Then this is one most people don't do. You mentioned this too, is we always talk about the fear and the costs of it going wrong. Like, oh, if it goes wrong, what would the upshot be? Well, what about this? What's the cost of inaction? What's the cost of doing nothing? We don't always assess that. And very seldom do people talk to us and say, well, the risk of not taking action here is pretty significant when you look at it over the long haul. Who has had that happen to you if you don't have a good mentor? Most people don't. We talk about the fear if you do something, but let's be real. There is risk to not moving forward, right? Because where I am right now is in a vastly different place than where I would be if I had stayed in that job. I would have 2 weeks of vacation per year. And at the time I left that job, I was making $11, right? And the upside of that was probably not really big. Now, I'm not faulting anybody who's chosen to stay and do these things. That's not mine to judge. But for me, I would not have been happy had I stayed. And that's one of the things that motivated me. I looked into the future and I said, what am I going to feel like if I don't do this? And I thought, I can't take that risk. The risk of me not taking it is greater than the risk of me taking it.
Yeah, we see on social media and all the time where people say, when we're talking to people on their deathbeds, what do they regret? No, it's not working longer hours. It's not X, Y, or Z. It's the opportunities that they didn't take. That is what people regret. And so I jokingly but seriously say, like, when I go, I want to crash into a home with scars and bruises and be battered up. And I want life to have taken its toll on me because it means I lived. It means that I tried, I pushed myself, I explored, I reached new heights, I built deeper relationships, I fell on my face so many times, figuratively and literally. And you know what? It was all completely worth it. And it made me the person I am today, the friend, the everything. Yeah, the opportunity cost at some point just becomes very clear and you take action.
Yep. So do you have a story, Kristi, of when you looked at a thing and you thought, I don't know, I'm not really sure if I want to move forward with this outside of your moving to a new job, and that you did or didn't take? Because maybe it was fear that held you back, or maybe it was prudence that held you back, or you looked at something and you took a calculated risk.
I have two examples, one being a property and one being a client partnership. The property one would be the very first townhome that I ever bought that was mine to live in. And I thought, because I had always thought that if you buy a property, you have to live in it. And now you have to put down roots. And now you don't get to travel. And you now have to live in this one city forever. That sounded terrifying to me. To most people, they'd be like, thank goodness, comfort, stability. To me, that was not the case. And also doing it by myself, to saying, I will buy this townhome on my own. I'm now responsible for mortgage, insurance, utilities. What if something breaks inside? I don't know. I had never done that in a residential house. So, and even going through the loan process and underwriting, it was all completely foreign and new. I didn't know what any of the documents meant or said. I'm just signing away 50, 100 pages of just going, I hope everyone's telling me the truth and not lying to me. Thankfully, we have tools like notebook.lm that we can throw things into and ask it to explain to us now. But yeah, just taking that first leap and realizing that, hey, if that townhome didn't work out, again, it's not going to zero. Even if I sold it and for some reason there was a loss, I was going to learn. And that just helped so much in kind of getting in and not playing small anymore. And another one would be, so when I did start my development consulting company, I did take on clients, and I quickly realized that I, as the owner, got to make the decision of who I worked with, to where I didn't need to put up with people who weren't my ideal avatar, who didn't have the character, the integrity, or the type of business and work that aligned with what I wanted to do. And there was a major coffee chain that I ended up separating with because where they were going in their leadership and the private equity that had taken over, it no longer aligned with what we wanted to do. And even though most of my team was managing that portion of it, I was not willing to make money and have my team miserable, and they just weren't a good fit. So having that conversation and letting them go, and knowing that, hey, we're going to need to get more revenue from other projects and clients, but this is something we have to do because the opportunity cost of keeping them is worse than letting them go.
That it's okay to say no, right? Is that we've also been conditioned by podcasts and social media and all this other stuff that if we say no, oh, you're a chicken, you're a coward, you're not making bold moves, right? And that you're somehow a loser. That is not true. There is a time when your values say no. There is a time when your risk assessment says, actually, no, this is not a good idea to do this. And so if you say no, that's okay. I'm giving you permission right now to use, if you're using these tools, right, and you're actually assessing and you're naming and you're assigning likelihoods and probabilities, and you've talked to people about this, and you still don't feel good about that, that could be prudence talking, not irrational fear. And so I am giving you permission to say, no, thank you, because sometimes prudence says, no, thank you. And that's okay. I was on a call, video call with somebody who said, I don't know, I'm afraid, she used the word fear, to move forward on this. Why? What's going on? Like, well, the deals don't really look that good. They're not penciling out very well. And besides, I would have to take out a HELOC on my own home, and I don't know if I could pay the bills. Friends, that is prudence talking. That is not fear, right? If you're going to lose your own home on a deal that's not very good, that is not winning. That's the difference between actual progress and bravery and bravado. There's a difference between those two things. Bravado is just like, yeah, gung ho, we're going to do this thing no matter what. And bravery says, okay, I've calculated what needs to happen here. It's a little bit scary, but that's my emotions talking. I'm going to move forward anyways. There's a big difference. That's what I'd say about that. And it's okay to do that. In my world, sometimes as I'm assessing things, when the beginning of this year rolled around, I looked at a number of opportunities that I had. Well, do I want to do this or this or this or this or this? I can't do them all. What will I say yes to and what will I say no to? One of the things I put into my matrix to make that decision was what I call the 10-10-10-E model. If I make this decision, yes or no, how will I feel? How will it impact me? What will my life be like in 10 days? Now, I didn't come up with this idea of the 10-10-10. This is something that is out there in the self-development literature. And they say in 10 minutes, how will I feel in 10 minutes? Well, you know what, friends? I do not make a decision based on how I'm going to feel in 10 minutes. And my life has got a longer horizon than that. I'm not making decisions based on that. How will I feel the 10-10-10 in 10 days? Right? Maybe it's difficult in 10 days. Maybe it's super easy in 10 days. How will I feel in 10 months? And what will the impact of this decision be in 10 years? And here's the really interesting thing, is that some things that we look at that we'll say, oh, in 10 days, this will be awesome. In 10 months, it'd be like, okay. And in 10 years, I'll look back and go, well, that wasn't a very good use of assets. And flip side, there are things that in 10 days, I'll be like, oh, why did I say yes? I hate this. And in 10 months, I'll be like, oh, man, I'm kind of pulling out of it. But in 10 years, I'll look back and say, oh, wow, I am glad I did that work. And so I ask myself for these key things, the 10-10-10-E. And the E is I look at it from the perspective of eternity. How will I call that decision, that issue, that thing from the perspective of eternity? Is that going to matter to me? Because sometimes that light, and it's the last two in that 10-10-10-E that really make that decision. Now, sometimes it's like in 10 years, this won't matter one way or the other, right? Some things are like that. If I bought those shoes, in 10 years, it's not going to matter whether I did or didn't. Really, it won't. right? And so some things are that way. And that helps me assess, hey, do I want to push through this? How is this going to play out for me? Because we often think on the very short end of things. How's this going to feel in a couple of days, in a couple of minutes, when my credit card bill comes due? How's that going to, what do my friends think, over the next weeks or months? But I'll tell you this, as I'm not 29 years old anymore, I care less and less about what other people will decide and judge about what I do. Because guess what? They are not living my life. I am living my life. And I need to do those things at the risk of sounding selfish, which I don't think I am selfish, but this has to be for me. This has to be for my life, my decisions, my values. Now, I believe Kristi and I did a podcast about our values. And I don't think either one of us is self-focused. That's why we're doing this podcast for free here, right? But it has to be me. I'm not going to make those decisions based on what somebody else thinks is cool or not cool. And thinking about that decision over the long haul is what gives me opportunity to move forward when I might be afraid, and fear being the emotion part, to say, okay, I'm just going to say no to that emotion right now, and I'm going to move on anyways.
I think it's huge to be able to project into your future self and think about, what am I doing? Like, am I going to eat the ice cream in the freezer today when I know that my quarterly goal is that I want to be in the best shape of my life and I want to eat clean foods? So there's one thing that a question I have for myself in my notes that says, every day ask yourself, what choices will I make today that my future self will thank me for? So just by taking, even though it's still us, it's, if we think about our future selves and we think about the current challenge that's in front of us, and that gives us a good perspective to then know how to put one foot in front of the other and how to make the decision for which choice to make. And then on top of that, you said at the beginning, but having the right people around you and your own personal advisors of people who know you, who you trust and respect, who are maybe a couple steps ahead of you, but definitely people who take action, and bouncing it off of them and being vulnerable and going, hey, I really think that this is what I'm called to do. I'm leaning in this direction. You know me, you know what I'm willing to do. You know my end goals. What do you think from the outside of this decision I'm going to make? What's your opinion? And knowing that they're not just going to say, okay, do this and I'm going to follow it, but knowing that they're going to give me more insight, more data so I can make the best well-rounded decision for my future self.
Yep. These are all tools to help us move forward, because really life would keep us in stasis otherwise, because it's easy, right? It's inertia. It's like, the body at rest tends to stay at rest. And many people do that. Now, the opposite is also true, is that, and I don't think it's opposite, it's just the same rule differently applied. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. And so as you take steps, even if they are small steps, the smallest of steps, that builds momentum. And that momentum gets you experience, and that experience, taking small risks, builds risk tolerance. It gives you a better ability to assess real risk. I was interviewing a Secret Service agent once in downtown Denver and taking his pictures. And he said, somebody came out and they said, oh, I'm worried about this, about you guys taking pictures out here as a security risk. They had no idea. They're talking to a person who at that moment was part of a team in charge of the entire law enforcement agencies, all the agencies in Denver. Like, that's actually the guy that they're talking to. And he was very polite to them. And he said, oh, we'll go somewhere else to take some pictures. And so we did. He said something very interesting to me. He says, most people are very bad at assessing actual risk. And that really stuck with me. I was like, we're afraid of the little things that probably don't have much harm to us at all. We're like, oh, I don't want to do that because it's scary.
I'm laughing because just this morning I thought, because I watched something as a kid, there was a snake in a toilet, and will to this day look in the freaking toilet to see if there is a snake before I use the bathroom. That is so stupid. I actually thought this morning and started laughing. If there ever is a snake in my toilet, that will be a 1 in a gazillion chance. And I will go, it finally happened to me. Like, there's no way this is going to happen. So yes,
Yep. So we are bad at assessing risks. And unfortunately, the fear keeps us from doing things that we should be doing. Meanwhile, we're not afraid of things that are probably killing us and holding us back. And that's where the real danger is. So we want to encourage you to recognize the difference between fear and prudence. Prudence being the intellectual assessment of actual risks, and fear just this like, I don't know, I just feel bad about it, I'm not gonna go there. Because from our perspective in real estate investing, it makes all the difference in the world. We want you to be successful. Speaking of tools, we are going to put access to this fear assessment into the show notes. You can download that for free. We want you to overcome your fears. We want you to be successful in what you do. And this is us helping teach and mentor you. This is important to note, though. This is not legal advice. It's not financial advice. It's not accounting advice. It is not diving advice. Always check how deep it is before you do that, by the way. We want you to be successful. We want you to be careful and survive. One last warning. If you do this, if you step out in bravery and you use prudence and you make this step and you take calculated risks, you will be successful eventually, right? You'll have setbacks. That's what this podcast is about also. But you will be successful and you will be ruined for life. You will never be able to go back into that little box that at one time you thought was comfortable and you were afraid to leave. This is my warning. Once you leave that and you experience the freedom outside of that, you can never go back. You are ruined. And now you just move forward to bigger and better things. And that is our hope for you. Thanks for joining us on the Real Estate Pessimist podcast. If you like this, please rate, review, share it with a friend. That's the highest compliment you can give it to us. Thanks for joining us.